The stars have always been patient. They do not count the years as civilizations count them, in triumphs, in treaties, in the rise and fall of empires that believe themselves eternal. The stars simply burn. They watch. They wait. And in their cold, ancient light, they remember everything that the galaxy's children would rather forget. I have lived for 2,317 standard cycles. In that time, I have seen 14 species achieve faster than light travel. I have witnessed 6 galactic councils form, fracture, and dissolve into silence. I have stood on worlds so beautiful that poets wept to describe them. And I have watched those same worlds burn until their skies turned black with ash. But I had never known true fear. Not until the Hollow came. Not until the galaxy turned away. My name is Velith Khan, and I am the last High Arbiter of the Kethvari Dominion. I held that title for 600 years before the war began, and I will likely hold it until my species draws its final breath. There are few of us left now to argue over succession. I remember when we were mighty. I remember when our fleet carriers stretched across the void like silver threads connecting 1,000 worlds. I remember when younger species would send their diplomats to kneel before our councils, begging for scraps of our wisdom, for access to our archives, for the privilege of existing in our shadow. We were not cruel masters. That is what I told myself in those golden centuries before the fire. We were simply superior. Our civilization had endured for 47,000 years. We had unlocked secrets of the cosmos that other species could not even conceptualize. We had earned our pride. The humans arrived in the galactic community 300 years ago. I remember the reports. A small, fragile species from a single world in an unremarkable system at the edge of the Orion Spur. They had developed crude, faster-than-light engines, barely functional by our standards, and they sent out their little ships like children throwing seeds into an ocean, hoping something might grow. We dismissed them. Everyone did. They were so young, so limited. Their lifespans were laughably brief, their technology primitive, and their homeworld was a chaotic mess of competing nations that could barely agree on anything. We gave them observation status in the Galactic Concord and promptly forgot they existed. There were more important concerns after all. The Rithali were expanding aggressively. The collective of minds was conducting questionable experiments near the galactic core, and there were always whispers, old stories, about things that slept in the spaces between stars. We should have listened to those stories. The Hollow emerged from the void 17 years ago. No one knows where they came from. No one knows what they want. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They simply arrive, vast geometric vessels that drink light and radiate wrongness, and they consume. Worlds, stations, entire star systems. They leave nothing behind but darkness and silence. In the first year, they destroyed the collective of minds. 40 billion sentient beings, a civilization that had existed for 12,000 years, erased in 93 days. Their home system is a tomb now. The stars there have gone cold. The galaxy panicked. The Galactic Concord convened emergency sessions. Ancient enemies set aside their feuds. For the first time in millennia, the great powers of the galaxy united against a common threat. It was not enough. The Hollow moved through our combined fleets like fire through dry grass. We threw our greatest weapons at them, singularity bombs, quantum disruptors, technologies that had taken centuries to develop, and they absorbed everything. They adapted. They grew stronger. By the 5th year, the Rethali were gone. Their empire of 300 worlds collapsed in a single season. I remember receiving the final transmission from their homeworld, a single image of the sky turning black, and then nothing. By the 10th year, a third of the galaxy had fallen silent. And then the turning began. It started with the Veloxi. They were our oldest allies, bound to the Kethvari by treaties that predated memory. When the Hollow reached the outer systems of their territory, they sent their diplomats to our council chambers. I received them personally, expecting to coordinate our defense. Instead, they came to say goodbye. "We cannot fight this," Ambassador Torrent told me, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic maps of our crumbling territory. "Nothing can. The Veloxi will retreat to the Andromeda Galaxy. Our generation ships are already prepared. We advise you to do the same." I remember the cold that spread through my chest. You would abandon us after everything we have built together? "We would survive," he said simply. "That is what matters now." They left within the month. 17 billion Veloxi, fleeing to another galaxy entirely, leaving behind everything their species had ever built. They were not the last. The consortium of 12 fractured. The mindful alliance dissolved. Species that had stood together for millennia suddenly remembered ancient grievances and used them as excuses to retreat, to hide, to save themselves at the expense of others. One by one, the great civilizations of the galaxy turned away. And then it was our turn. The Hollow reached the outer systems of the Kethvari Dominion 2 years ago. We fought, of course. We are an old species, and we have our pride. But pride does not stop vessels that can survive the collapse of a star. Pride does not halt weapons that unmake matter at the quantum level. We lost 17 worlds in the first month. By the end of the first year, our fleet was reduced to 1/10 of its former strength. Our population had fallen from 12 billion to less than 2 billion, and the Hollow kept coming, relentless and patient, as if they had all the time in the universe. Which I suppose they did. That was when I made the decision that brought me here. I had exhausted every option within the galactic concord. The species that remained were either too weak to help or too afraid to try. Our old allies were gone, fled to distant galaxies, or dead in the void. There was no one left to ask. Except the humans. I did not want to go to them. The thought of requesting aid from such a young, primitive species felt like the final humiliation. What could they possibly offer? Their technology was centuries behind ours. Their fleet was tiny. Their homeworld was still recovering from whatever ecological disaster they had inflicted upon themselves in their industrial age. But my advisors insisted. They have not fled, Councillor Mithari pointed out during our final strategy session. Every other species has either fallen or retreated. The humans remain. Perhaps because they are too stupid to understand the danger? I replied bitterly. Perhaps, she conceded. Or perhaps they understand something we do not. I did not believe her, but I had no other options. So I came here, to this unremarkable station orbiting a small, pale sun in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. I came as a beggar, though I tried to convince myself I was a diplomat.
I came to ask humanity for help. The station was called Threshold.
It hung in the darkness between Earth and Mars, a rotating cylinder of metal and light that seemed almost quaint compared to the soaring architectural marvels of Qerath space. There were no sweeping spires, no crystalline domes, no displays of technological superiority. Just functionality, purpose, clean lines, and efficient design. I docked my ship, one of the last personal vessels of the High Arbiter class, and stepped through the airlock with what dignity I could muster. My translator implants hummed softly, calibrating to the dominant human language in this sector. A young human woman was waiting for me. She was small by the standards of most galactic species, barely reaching my chest in height. Her skin was a warm brown, her hair dark and closely cropped, and she wore a simple uniform with minimal insignia. Nothing about her suggested importance. "High Arbiter Veleth Khan," she said, and her pronunciation of my name was surprisingly accurate. "Welcome to Threshold Station. I'm Captain Amara Okonkwo. I'll be your liaison during your visit." I inclined my head in the traditional Qerath gesture of acknowledgement. "Captain, I appreciate your people's willingness to meet with me on such short notice." "We've been expecting you," she said. Something in her tone made me pause. "Expecting me?" "Word travels, High Arbiter, even to the edge of the galaxy." She gestured down the corridor. "If you'll follow me, I'll take you to the conference room. Can I offer you any refreshments? We've studied Qerath dietary requirements, but I can't promise we've got it exactly right." "That will not be necessary." "Of course. This way, please." She walked ahead of me, her steps measured and unhurried. I found myself studying her, searching for any sign of the fear or deference that I was accustomed to seeing in younger species. There was none. She moved through her station with the easy confidence of someone who felt completely safe in their environment. It was unsettling. The corridors of Threshold were busy but orderly. Humans moved past us in small groups, nodding to the captain as they went. I noticed that many of them glanced at me with curiosity, but none showed surprise or alarm, as if an alien dignitary from a dying civilization was simply another item on the day's agenda. "Your station is efficient," I said, searching for something neutral to observe.
"Thank you," Captain Okonkwo replied. "We built it to last."
"How old is it?" "About 120 years, standard, give or take." I suppressed a flicker of amusement. 120 years. That was less time than I typically spent deliberating on a single policy amendment. These humans measured their accomplishments in such tiny increments. And yet they were still here, when so many others had fled. The conference room was as utilitarian as everything else on the station. A long table, several chairs, a viewport looking out at the stars. 3 humans were already seated when we arrived. An older man with gray hair and weathered features, a younger woman with pale skin and sharp eyes, and a middle-aged man who watched me with an expression I could not read. "High Arbiter," the older man said, rising. "I'm Admiral James Chen, Commander of Earth's Combined Fleet. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, our xenoanthropologist, and Director Marcus Webb of the Planetary Defense Council." I acknowledged each of them with the appropriate gestures. "Thank you for receiving me.
I understand that your species has limited involvement in galactic affairs, and my request is unusual.
Admiral Chen's expression did not change. Please, sit. Tell us what you need. I settled into the chair they had provided, adjusted, I noted, to accommodate my physiology, and tried to gather my thoughts. I had prepared speeches, elegant arguments designed to appeal to a primitive species' desire for recognition and alliance. But sitting here, in this modest room, facing these calm, patient humans, all my prepared words felt hollow. "The Cathvari Dominion is dying," I said finally. "The Hollow have consumed half our remaining territory. Our fleet is broken. Our people are scattered across refugee convoys with nowhere to go." I paused, feeling the weight of every word. We came to the Galactic Concord for aid. We reminded them of treaties, of alliances, of obligations stretching back millennia. Do you know what they did? "They left," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. I looked at her sharply. "Yes, how did you know?" "Because they left everyone," she replied. "We've been monitoring communications across the galactic network for years. We've watched civilizations that we'd only ever read about in ancient transmissions simply disappear. Some destroyed by the Hollow, others fleeing to distant galaxies or hiding in dark corners of space. The response has been remarkably consistent." "Self-preservation," Director Webb added. "The most rational response to an unwinnable scenario." Something in his tone bothered me. Not accusation exactly, more like observation, as if he were describing the behavior of laboratory specimens. "And yet your species has not fled," I said. "Earth is within reach of the Hollow's projected expansion. Your colonies are scattered and vulnerable. By any rational assessment, you should have begun evacuation procedures years ago." Admiral Chen leaned back in his chair. "What makes you think we haven't considered it?" "Have you?" A long pause. The humans exchanged glances that communicated something I could not interpret. "We've considered every option, High Arbiter," Captain Okonkwo said from her position near the door. "Evacuation, hibernation ships, generation vessels bound for other galaxies. We've run the simulations, done the math, calculated the survival probabilities down to the decimal point." "And?" "And we decided to say." I stared at her. "That is irrational." "Maybe," she shrugged. A gesture I had learned indicated casual dismissal. But running didn't feel right. "Feel right?" I heard the incredulity in my own voice. "The Hollow have destroyed civilizations that made your entire species look like infants. They have weapons that unmake reality itself, and your decision is based on how it feels?" Dr. Vasquez spoke again, her voice soft but somehow penetrating. "High Arbiter, may I ask you a question?" I hesitated. "You may." "In your species' history, your full 47,000 years of civilization, what is the longest period you ever spent in genuine existential struggle? I don't mean political conflict or resource competition. I mean fighting for survival as a species with no guarantee of success." The question caught me off guard. I searched my memory, pulling up historical records I had studied centuries ago. There was the Sundering, approximately 30,000 years past, a civil war that lasted several centuries. But our species' survival was never truly in doubt. "Several centuries," she repeated. "And before that?" "Before that, we had already achieved technological superiority over our homeworld's other apex species. We dominated our planet within a few generations of developing sapience. I see, she nodded slowly. Would you like to know how long humans spent fighting for survival? Something in her tone made my secondary heart begin to beat faster. How long? 200,000 years. But you didn't, I said slowly. No, we didn't. Because we learned to do something that evolution had not prepared us for. We learned to cooperate, not just in family groups or tribes, but across entire populations. We learned to share knowledge, to plan for the future, to sacrifice individual advantage for collective survival. And more than anything, she leaned forward, her eyes holding mine. We learned to endure. Admiral Chen spoke then, his voice quiet but heavy with something I could not name. Our species has been through ice ages, plagues, famines, and wars that killed hundreds of millions. We nearly destroyed ourselves with our own weapons more than once. We have faced extinction scenarios that would have broken any species that had not already spent 200,000 years learning how to survive the unsurvivable. We don't run, Director Webb said simply. It's not in our nature. I sat in silence for a long moment, processing their words. I had come here expecting to find primitives, simple creatures who might provide cannon fodder, or perhaps some novel technology our scientists had overlooked. Instead, I found something else entirely. Something I did not yet understand. Your species has had no contact with the Hollow, I said finally. You have not seen what they can do. You have not watched worlds die, felt the despair that comes when every weapon fails and every hope crumbles. How can you speak of endurance when you have not faced the trial? Captain Okonkwo moved from the doorway and settled into the empty chair beside Admiral Chen. Her expression was thoughtful, almost gentle. High Arbiter, she said, when your species faced the Sundering, your great civil war, how did you feel? Were you afraid? I was not yet born when the Sundering ended. But your historical records, your cultural memory, how does your species remember that time? I considered the question. It is remembered as a tragedy, a shameful period when our unity fractured and we turned against ourselves. The histories speak of it with regret and determination that it never happen again. But not with fear. No, we survived. We emerged stronger. Fear would be inappropriate. She nodded slowly. On Earth, we have a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's not always true, of course. Sometimes what doesn't kill you leaves scars that never heal. But for our species as a whole, it has been true often enough to become part of our identity. Every catastrophe we survived taught us something. Every near extinction made us more resilient, more adaptable, more dangerous. Dangerous? I repeated. To those who would try to destroy us, yes. Admiral Chen rose from his chair and moved to the viewport. His back was to me, but I could see his reflection in the glass, a weathered face staring out at the stars with an expression of weary patience. High Arbiter, you came here to ask for our help. I respect that. It took courage to seek out a species your civilization dismissed as primitive. He turned to face me. But before we discuss what we might offer, I need you to understand something. What is that? We have been watching the Hollow for 17 years. We have analyzed every scrap of data from every engagement, every transmission, every piece of debris left behind after their attacks. We have run simulations, developed theories, and prepared contingencies that we have never shared with the Galactic Concord. My outer scales rippled again. You have been studying them? Secretly? We learned a long time ago that in a crisis, the galaxy's powers tend to look out for themselves first. We decided to do the same, but differently. Instead of building evacuation ships, we built weapons. Instead of calculating escape routes, we calculated attack vectors. Attack vectors? I could not keep the disbelief from my voice. Against the Hollow? Nothing your civilizations have tried, Director Webb interrupted. But you've been fighting the same way for millennia. The same weapons, the same tactics, the same fundamental assumptions about how war should be conducted. When those assumptions failed against the Hollow, you had no alternatives. And you believe you have alternatives? The humans exchanged another of those unreadable glances. High Arbiter, Dr. Vasquez said carefully, our species has spent its entire existence adapting to impossible situations. We've had to, or we would have died out long before we left our planet. That adaptability, it's not just a skill, it's the core of what we are. When we encounter a problem we can't solve with the tools we have, we invent new tools. The Hollow are not a problem to be solved with tools. They are an existential threat beyond comprehension. Maybe, Captain Okonkwo said, but we've faced those before too, and we're still here. I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain to these naive, short-lived creatures that they did not understand what they were facing, that the Hollow were unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered, that civilizations far older and more advanced than humanity had thrown everything they had at the enemy and failed. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence in their eyes. Perhaps it was the complete absence of fear in their voices. Or perhaps it was the slow, dawning realization that I had come here expecting to find primitives, and instead I had found something else entirely. Something patient. Something waiting. What exactly are you proposing? I asked carefully. Admiral Chen moved back to the table and sat down. We're proposing an alliance, a real one, not the kind of convenient arrangement that dissolves the moment things get difficult. If the Kethvari are willing to share what you know about the Hollow, their patterns, their weaknesses, everything you've learned in 17 years of war, then we're willing to share what we've developed. And what have you developed? He smiled, a thin, humorless expression. Come with me. I think it's time you saw our fleet. I had studied human naval vessels in the Galactic Concord's archives. I knew they were small, limited in number, equipped with technology that our engineers would have considered outdated centuries ago. I expected to see a modest collection of patrol ships and perhaps a few primitive carriers. What I saw instead stopped my hearts. We traveled by shuttle from Threshold Station to a point in space that appeared empty on every sensor system I could interpret. But when we arrived, Admiral Chen touched a control on his wrist and the void came alive. Ships. Thousands of them. They emerged from behind cloaking fields so sophisticated that not even my shuttle's advanced sensors had detected them. Carriers the size of small moons, battleships bristling with weapons I did not recognize, cruisers and destroyers and support vessels spreading across my field of vision until the stars themselves were obscured. This is the first combined fleet, Admiral Chen said quietly. There are 4 more like it. My voice, when I found it, was barely a whisper. This is impossible. Your industrial capacity, your population, your resources, You could not have built this in 300 years.
We didn't build it in 300 years, Captain Okonkwo said from beside me. We built most of it in the last decade, after we watched the collective of minds fall.
Difficult, she agreed. Every shipyard on every human world working around the clock. Every resource we had diverted to a single purpose. Every citizen who could contribute, contributing. We called it the quiet preparation.
Why did you not inform the Galactic Concord? Admiral Chen's expression hardened slightly.
Because we remember what happened when we first made contact with the galactic community. We were evaluated, categorized, and dismissed. We were given observation status and quietly pushed to the margins because we weren't advanced enough to matter. For 3 centuries, we've been watching your civilizations operate. We've seen how power works in this galaxy. The strong take what they want. The weak either serve or disappear.
We would not have.
With respect, High Arbiter, you absolutely would have. If we had revealed this fleet while the great powers were still intact, they would have viewed us as a threat. They would have found reasons to contain us, limit us, keep us in our place. So we stayed quiet. We built in secret. And we waited.
Waited for what?
For this. He gestured at the viewport, at the vast fleet hanging silent in the darkness. For the moment when the galaxy's options had run out, when even the proudest civilizations had nowhere left to turn. He looked at me directly, his eyes holding mine with unsettling intensity. For you. I felt something cold move through my chest. Not fear exactly, something closer to recognition. The recognition of a predator encountering another predator. You planned this, I said slowly. From the beginning. The quiet development, the hidden fleets, the deliberate appearance of weakness. You have been waiting for the galaxy to fall so that you could rise.
No, Dr. Vasquez said sharply. That's not it at all. Then what is it?
Captain Okonkwo answered, her voice gentle but firm. We've been waiting for the galaxy to need us. There's a difference. Explain. She moved to the viewport, standing silhouetted against the endless field of human warships. High Arbiter, our species has a complicated history with power. We've seen what happens when advanced civilizations exploit weaker ones. We did it ourselves for centuries before we grew past it. We've learned that strength alone doesn't build lasting peace. It has to be offered, not imposed. It has to be given freely when it's truly needed, or it becomes just another form of domination.
We could have revealed ourselves years ago, Admiral Chen added. We could have demanded a seat at the Galactic Concord, forced recognition of our capabilities, claimed territory and influence. But that wasn't the right moment. The galaxy didn't need us yet. The old powers were still convinced they could handle anything.
And now? I asked.
Now they're gone, fled or fallen. And you're here, High Arbiter, asking for help. Not because you have to, not because we forced you, but because you chose to. That matters.
I stared at them, these strange, calm creatures who spoke of galactic power dynamics as if they were simple matters of ethics. I had negotiated with hundreds of species over my long life, and I had never encountered anything quite like this. They were not arrogant. Not in the way the old powers were arrogant. They did not seem to believe they were superior. They simply knew what they were capable of, and they were waiting for the right time to reveal it. It was, I realized, profoundly unsettling. Your weapons, I said finally. You mentioned that you've developed alternatives, things your scientists created specifically to fight the Hollow.
Yes. Show me. They took me to a research station hidden in the asteroid belt of their home system. It was even more heavily shielded than their fleet, buried so deep in rock and shadow that it would have been invisible to any search. Inside, human scientists in sterile suits worked alongside beings I did not recognize, artificial intelligences housed in mechanical bodies, their movements eerily precise. We call them synths, Director Webb explained as we walked through the corridors. Fully sapient artificial beings. They have the same rights as organic humans in our society. Artificial beings with rights? I repeated, trying to process the concept. Your civilization grants legal protections to its own creations? Of course, they're people, different from us in form, but equal in every way that matters. It was such a small detail, but somehow it revealed more about humanity than everything else I had seen. A species that extended ethical consideration even to its own artificial children. What else might they be capable of? The weapons laboratory was vast and cold. Holographic displays showed complex diagrams that my translator struggled to interpret. Quantum field equations, dimensional geometry, theoretical physics that pushed the boundaries of what I understood to be possible. The hollow operate by manipulating the fundamental structure of space-time, Dr. Vasquez explained, her voice taking on the eager cadence of a scholar discussing her passion. They don't just destroy matter, they unmake the dimensional framework that allows matter to exist. It's why conventional weapons are useless. You can't fight something that rewrites the rules of reality. We understood this, I said. Our scientists reached the same conclusions, but understanding the problem did not provide a solution. No, because you were still thinking in terms of destruction. She touched a control, and a holographic image appeared, a swirling, impossible shape that hurt to look at. This is a dimensional anchor. We developed it by studying the only thing the hollow have never been able to consume, the fabric of hyperspace itself. The domain they use to travel is also the domain where they're weakest. You intend to fight them in hyperspace? We intend to trap them there. I stared at the impossible shape on the display, trying to understand what I was seeing. That would require an impossible amount of coordinated energy, yes, more than any single fleet or civilization could generate. But we don't intend to do it alone. Admiral Chen stepped forward. High Arbiter, we didn't build this fleet just for ourselves. We built it to carry a network of dimensional anchors capable of cutting off the Hollow's retreat into hyperspace. But to deploy them effectively, we need precise data about Hollow movement patterns. Data that only a civilization that has been fighting them for 17 years would have. You need our intelligence, I said slowly. We need your partnership. Your knowledge combined with our weapons, your experience combined with our adaptability, your civilization's network of observation posts and relay stations combined with our fleet's striking power. A true alliance. More than that. Captain Okonkwo stepped forward, her expression earnest. A commitment, not just to defeat the Hollow, but to build something different afterward. Something better than the old galaxy, with its hierarchies and dismissals and ancient civilizations treating younger species like irrelevant children. I was silent for a long moment, processing everything I had seen and heard. The hidden fleet, the revolutionary weapons, a strange philosophy of power offered rather than imposed. These humans were not what I had expected. They were not what anyone had expected. Your species has been planning this for decades, I said finally, building in secret, waiting for the right moment, and yet you speak of partnership and equality?
How do I know this is not simply another form of manipulation, a more sophisticated predator wearing the mask of an ally?
Admiral Chen did not flinch from the question. You don't. Trust isn't given, it's built over time through actions. All we can offer is a beginning. The choice of whether to accept it is yours. And if I refuse? If the Qerath decide that humanity is too dangerous to ally with? Then we will still fight the Hollow, he said simply, with or without your help. Because that's what we do. We don't run.
Something in his voice, in the quiet certainty of his words, reached through my exhaustion and touched something I had thought was dead.
Hope. I had forgotten what hope felt like. I need to contact what remains of my government, I said. There will be debates, arguments. Many of my people will share my initial suspicion of your motives.
We understand. But I paused, searching for words. I believe you. I don't know why, but I believe you mean what you say. And I will argue for this alliance with everything I have. Captain Okonkwo smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from any of them. That's all we ask, High Arbiter. A chance to prove ourselves. One question, I said. Of course. Why? Why do this? Why fight for a galaxy that dismissed you, that pushed you to the margins, that never gave you the recognition you clearly deserved? Why not simply wait for the Hollow to destroy everyone else and then claim what remains? The humans exchanged glances again. That silent communication that I was beginning to recognize as a shared understanding too deep for words.
It was Dr. Vasquez who answered.
Because we remember what it was like, she said softly, to be small, to be frightened, to face something so vast and terrible that survival seemed impossible. Every human carries that memory in their bones, whether they know it or not. The cold of the ice ages, the terror of the predators, the despair of watching half your tribe die from a disease you couldn't understand.
We survived all of that, Admiral Chen added, but we never forgot it. And because we remember what it feels like to be helpless, we cannot stand by while others face that helplessness, even if they once dismissed us, even if they never earned our loyalty. He shook his head slowly. It's not about what the galaxy deserves. It's about who we choose to be.
I had no response to that. I simply stood there, surrounded by weapons that could reshape the cosmos, in the presence of a species I had once considered primitive, and felt something I had not felt in years. I felt small.
And for the first time, I understood that smallness was not the same as weakness.
The debates among the Qerath survivors lasted 3 weeks. It was, by our standards, an impossibly short time for such a momentous decision. Normally, we would have deliberated for months, perhaps years, weighing every consideration with the careful patience of an ancient civilization. But we no longer had that luxury. While we debated, the Hollow consumed 2 more systems on the edge of our remaining territory. Our refugee convoys reported more attacks, more losses, more worlds going dark. Every day we delayed was a day we could not afford. In the end, the Council voted in favor of the alliance. Not unanimously. There were those who believed humanity was too dangerous to trust, who saw their hidden fleet as evidence of duplicity rather than prudence, but by a sufficient margin to proceed. I transmitted our acceptance to Threshold Station and began the process of sharing everything we knew about the Hollow. The humans absorbed our data with a hunger that should have been frightening.
Their analysts worked around the clock, integrating 17 years of Qerath observations with their own theoretical models. Their synth researchers processed information at speeds that organic minds could not match. Within days, they had synthesized our scattered intelligence into something coherent. Something useful.
They have a pattern, Admiral Chen told me during one of our strategy sessions, pointing at a holographic map of the galaxy. The Hollow don't attack randomly. They follow specific vectors, prioritizing certain types of systems over others. Your scientists noticed this, but they didn't have enough data to identify the underlying logic.
And you have? We think so. They're drawn to certain quantum signatures, remnants of very old technology, the kind that the galaxy's most ancient civilizations used to create. He highlighted several points on the map. The collective of minds, the Rethali homeworld, the core systems of the Qerath dominion. All of them have one thing in common: traces of quantum-level manipulation dating back tens of thousands of years. I felt my outer scales shift. You believe they are hunting specific technologies?
Or the civilizations that created them. Either way, it explains why they've ignored certain regions entirely. Areas where no advanced species ever developed, where there's nothing old enough to attract their attention.
Areas like your home system. Exactly. Earth was never colonized by older species. Our system has no ancient ruins, no leftover technology from previous civilizations. To the Hollow, we're practically invisible.
Which is why you had time to prepare.
Yes, but that invisibility is ending. As they consume more territory, they're expanding their search patterns. Within a year, maybe two, they'll reach human space regardless.
I studied the map, watching the projected expansion of Hollow territory. It was a death sentence for everything in its path. Your dimensional anchors, I said. How many will you need to trap them?
Based on our calculations, a minimum of 12,000 deployed simultaneously across their entire occupied territory. Each anchor needs to be placed precisely at specific points in the hyperspace substrate. The timing has to be perfect. Any delay of more than a few seconds and they'll adapt, find a way to escape.
That is an enormous coordination challenge.
The largest military operation in the history of any species, he agreed, which is why we need your surviving fleet. Not to fight, your ships don't have the right weapons, but to place anchors in regions we can't reach in time.
You want us to participate directly in the attack.
We want you to participate directly in the victory. There's a difference. I considered his words carefully. The Qerath fleet was broken, barely capable of defending our remaining refugee convoys. The idea of sending our ships into active combat against the Hollow seemed like suicide. But the humans were not asking us to fight. They were asking us to help them win.
I will need to consult with what remains of our military command, I said.
Of course. Take whatever time you need.
Admiral Chen.
Yes?
If this works, if the Hollow are truly stopped, what happens then?
He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than I had ever heard it. Then we rebuild. Together. Not as masters and servants, not as ancient civilizations and primitive newcomers, but as equals. Species who survived the worst catastrophe the galaxy has ever known, working together to create something better. You truly believe that is possible? I have to believe it's possible. Otherwise, what are we fighting for? I had no answer. But for the first time, I wanted to find one. The operation was called Unity. It took 2 months to prepare. 2 months of constant coordination between human and Qerath forces, of positioning ships and manufacturing anchors and running simulation after simulation until every variable had been accounted for.
During that time, I lived among the humans.
I watched them prepare for what might be the end of their species. I observed their calm efficiency, their quiet determination, their absolute refusal to acknowledge the possibility of failure. And slowly, I began to understand what made them different from every other species I had encountered.
They were afraid. They simply chose not to be ruled by their fear.
I saw it in the way Captain Okonkwo's hands trembled slightly when she reviewed casualty projections. I heard it in the catch of Admiral Chen's voice when he spoke of the fleets that would likely be lost. I recognized it in the careful way Dr. Vasquez explained the physics of their weapons, as if she needed to focus on the technical details to avoid thinking about what they meant.
These humans were not ignorant of danger. They were not naively optimistic. They knew exactly what they were facing, exactly what it might cost. And they faced it anyway.
I asked Captain Okonkwo about it one evening, as we stood together on the observation deck of her flagship, watching the assembled fleet prepare for departure. "Are you not afraid?" I asked. She considered the question seriously. "Yes, constantly. Every time I think about what we're attempting, every time I look at those casualty projections, every time I remember that my sisters are on one of those ships, yes, I'm afraid." "Yet you proceed. What's the alternative? Run away, find a dark corner of the universe to hide in, spend the rest of our lives wondering if we could have made a difference?" She shook her head. "That's not who we are. That's not who we choose to be." "But how? How do you function with that fear, without letting it consume you?" She was silent for a long moment, staring out at the stars. "There's a concept in human philosophy," she said finally. "We call it grace under pressure. It means maintaining your composure, your humanity, your essential self, even when everything around you is falling apart. It's not about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and acting anyway, doing what needs to be done, not because you're fearless, but because the alternative is worse."
"Grace under pressure," I repeated, trying the phrase in my translator.
It's what separates us from the animals we evolved alongside. They react to fear. They fight or flee based on instinct. But we, humans, we have the capacity to choose, to look at the terror in front of us, acknowledge it, and then do what we believe is right, regardless.
Is that what you believe humanity is fighting for? The right to choose?
I think we're fighting for everyone's right to choose. Every species in this galaxy, even the ones who dismissed us, even the ones who fled, they deserve the chance to decide their own future. That's what the Hollow take away. Not just lives, but possibilities. They don't just destroy civilizations, they erase the potential for anything those civilizations might have become. I thought about her words as the final preparations continued around us. Thought about my own species, our ancient pride, our certainty that we were the pinnacle of galactic development. We had spent 47,000 years believing we had achieved everything worth achieving.
But we had never learned what the humans knew.
We had never learned how to be afraid and act anyway.
The attack began on what the humans called the summer solstice of their home world.
5 combined fleets, 200,000 ships, departed simultaneously from staging points across human-controlled space. They were joined by the remnants of the Qerath fleet, our vessels modified to carry the dimensional anchors that would seal the Hollow's fate.
I watched the operation unfold from the bridge of Admiral Chen's flagship, surrounded by human officers who worked with focused precision. There was no boasting, no speeches, no dramatic declarations, just calm competence and the quiet sounds of a military machine operating at its fullest capacity. The first engagements occurred 3 days into the operation. The Hollow emerged from hyperspace to intercept human scout formations, their impossible vessels materializing like nightmares given form. I had seen recordings of these encounters before, watched as Kethvari warships were torn apart by weapons that should not exist.
But the humans did not react the way we had.
They did not retreat. They did not panic. They engaged. Their weapons were unlike anything I had witnessed, missiles that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, energy beams that flickered in and out of reality, projectiles that bent space around themselves as they traveled. The hollow ships, so invulnerable to conventional arms, shuddered and reeled under the assault.
Direct hits on all primary targets, one of the bridge officers reported. Hollow vessels showing structural instability. They're attempting to withdraw into hyperspace.
Launch anchor sequence Alpha 7, Admiral Chen ordered. Cut off their retreat.
Across the battlefield, human ships deployed the dimensional anchors, delicate devices that should have been instantly destroyed by the Hollow's reality-warping weapons. But the anchors operated on principles the Hollow had never encountered, locking into the hyperspace substrate with a tenacity that defied their attempts to dislodge them.
For the first time in 17 years, the Hollow could not escape.
The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, 17 Hollow vessels had been destroyed, more than any previous engagement in the entire history of the war.
And the cost?
12 human ships lost. 732 lives.
Admiral Chen received the casualty report with a stillness that I had come to recognize as grief held carefully in check.
"Move to the next engagement zone," he said quietly. "Honor the fallen by finishing what they started." The operation continued for 6 weeks. I cannot describe all of it. The battles blend together in my memory, a continuous stream of violence and sacrifice and impossible victories. What I can describe is the scale.
12,000 dimensional anchors were deployed across the Hollow's entire occupied territory. 23 major engagements were fought, each one more desperate than the last, as the Hollow began to recognize the threat and concentrate their forces.
The human casualties mounted 40,000, 60,000, more than 100,000. But they did not stop. They did not waver. They did not run. I watched them mourn their dead in brief ceremonies held between battles, their voices steady as they spoke the names of the fallen. I watched them return to their stations and continue fighting with the same quiet determination they had shown from the beginning.
And I watched the Hollow begin to lose.
It happened slowly at first. Isolated vessels cut off from hyperspace retreat, destroyed by concentrated human firepower. Then, more quickly, as the anchor network began to function as designed, creating a web of dimensional barriers that trapped the Hollow in normal space.
By the 5th week, the tide had turned.
By the 6th week, it was over.
The final battle took place in the ruins of what had once been the Collective of Minds home system. The Hollow had gathered their remaining forces there, perhaps recognizing that this was their last stand. 64 Hollow vessels, the largest concentration ever recorded. Against them stood the combined human fleets, battered,
depleted, but still standing, still fighting.
Admiral Chen stood at the center of his bridge, his weathered face illuminated by the holographic displays that showed the enemy formation. I stood beside him, no longer an observer, but a participant.
"All ships, this is Admiral Chen." His voice was steady, carried across every human vessel in the fleet. 17 years ago, the Hollow emerged from the darkness and began consuming this galaxy. They have destroyed civilizations that had endured for millennia. They have killed trillions of sentient beings. They have spread fear and despair across every corner of known space.
He paused, and in that silence I could feel the weight of everything that had been lost.
Today, that ends. Not because we are stronger than the species that fell before us. We are not. Not because we have some special weapon or secret power. We do not. We are here because we made a choice. We chose to stand when others fled. We chose to fight when others surrendered. We chose to believe that even in the face of extinction, courage still matters.
His voice grew harder, more intense. The galaxy turned away, Earth stepped forward, and today we finish what we started. For the collective of minds, for the Refali, for the Kethvari, for every species that was lost or scattered because the galaxy's great powers couldn't find the will to stand together. We remember them, and we will honor them with victory.
All ships, engage. I cannot describe the battle that followed. Language fails to capture the scale of it, the searing brilliance of weapons that rewrote physics, the terrible beauty of hollow vessels breaking apart under sustained assault, the silent courage of human crews who knew they might not survive but attacked anyway. I can tell you that it lasted for 16 hours. I can tell you that 23,000 humans died. I can tell you that when the last hollow vessel collapsed into itself, folding into a dimension from which there would be no return, a cheer rose from the human fleet that I could feel through the hull of the ship. But none of that captures what I truly witnessed. I witnessed a species that had been dismissed as primitive demonstrate a form of strength that the galaxy's ancient civilizations had never understood. Not the strength of superior technology or ancient wisdom, but the strength of will, the strength of choice, the strength of individuals who knew they were afraid and acted anyway, because that was who they chose to be. The galaxy had turned away from the Hollow because the great powers believed some threats could not be faced. They calculated the odds, assessed the risks, and concluded that survival meant retreat. The humans calculated the same odds, assessed the same risks, and concluded that some things were worth fighting for even if you might lose. That is the difference. That is what made them worthy of inheriting the galaxy. It has been 3 years since the Battle of the Collective Ruins.
The Hollow are gone, not just defeated, eradicated. The dimensional anchors remain in place, ensuring that nothing like them can ever emerge from hyperspace again.
The galaxy is rebuilding. It is not the same galaxy that existed before the Hollow came. Many of the old powers are extinct. Others have fled so far that they may never return. The ancient orders and hierarchies that had governed interstellar civilization for millennia have collapsed. In their place, something new is growing. The humans did not impose their will on the surviving species. They did not claim territory or demand tribute or establish themselves as the new masters of the galaxy.
Instead, they did exactly what they promised. They helped us rebuild. Together, as equals.
It is strange working alongside creatures who live for such a brief time. Their lifespans are barely a century. By the time I finish a single thought, generations of humans have been born, lived, and died. And yet they accomplish more in their brief lives than my species achieved in millennia.
I understand now why that is.
They do not have time for caution. They do not have time for the endless deliberation that marked Qerath's civilization. They must act, must decide, must commit, because every moment they waste is a moment they will never get back.
That urgency, that precious scarcity of time, makes them treasure every day in ways that we never could. It makes them fierce and tender and impossibly brave because they know their existence is brief and they refuse to waste it on fear. I asked Captain Okonkwo about it once, as we watched the construction of a new colony on a world that the Hollow had ravaged. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "All the lives your species lost in the war? Was the price worth paying?" She considered the question for a long moment, watching human and Qerath workers laboring side by side in the distance. "The price was terrible," she said finally. "Every life lost was a tragedy. Every person who died had hopes, dreams, people who loved them. I will never minimize that cost."
But
they knew what they were fighting for. They chose to be there. And because of their choice, billions, trillions of beings still live. Civilizations that would have been erased now have a chance to continue. Children are being born on worlds that the Hollow never reached because we stopped them. The future exists because ordinary humans decided it was worth fighting for.
And if you had lost?
Then we would have lost fighting for something that mattered. We would have died knowing we did everything we could. That's not failure, High Arbiter. That's meaning. I did not understand that perspective immediately. It took years for the truth of it to sink in. Years of watching humans rebuild alongside us. Years of witnessing their strange combination of ambition and humility.
They are not a simple species. They are not the primitives we once assumed them to be.
They are survivors, endurers, beings forged by 200,000 years of struggle against an indifferent universe. And in the end, that made all the difference. I am old now. 2,342 standard cycles. My species is recovering, slowly rebuilding from the devastation we suffered. There are fewer than 1 billion of us left, scattered across worlds that still bear the scars of war. But we are alive. We are alive because when the galaxy turned away, Earth stepped forward. I keep a holographic image in my personal quarters, a recording from the final moments of the Battle of the Collective Ruins. It shows Admiral Chen on his bridge, bloodied and exhausted, receiving the news that the last Hollow vessel had been destroyed. I watch the recording sometimes, when I need to remember what I witnessed. In the image, Admiral Chen does not cheer. He does not celebrate. He simply closes his eyes for a moment, as if releasing a burden he had carried for years, and then turns to his officers with quiet orders to begin rescue operations for damaged ships. That is what heroism looks like, I have learned. Not glory, not triumph, just the steady, unglamorous work of doing what needs to be done, regardless of the cost. I was wrong about humanity. The galaxy was wrong about humanity. We saw their short lives and assumed they were ephemeral.
We saw their primitive technology and assumed they were inferior. We saw their internal conflicts and assumed they were too chaotic to matter. We did not understand that these apparent weaknesses were actually the source of their greatest strength. Their short lives made them urgent. Their technological limitations forced them to innovate. Their internal conflicts taught them cooperation against external threats. They were forged by struggle, tempered by hardship, made unconquerable by the very challenges that should have destroyed them. And when the galaxy's ancient powers fled or fell, humanity remained. They did not remain because they were too stupid to understand the danger. They remained because they understood something we had forgotten. They understood that some things are worth dying for. And that understanding, that willingness to face oblivion with open eyes and steady hands, is what separates those who merely survive from those who truly live. The galaxy turned away. Earth stepped forward. And the stars will remember that forever.
Velethkhan, last High Arbiter of the Kethvari Dominion.
Final Memoir Entry, Cycle 2342. Transmitted to the Galactic Archive on the 3rd anniversary of Unity. May those who read this understand what I have learned. The measure of a species is not the length of its history, nor the sophistication of its technology, nor the breadth of its territory. The measure of a species is what it does when all seems lost. When the Hollow came, the ancient civilizations of the galaxy calculated the odds and fled. Humanity calculated the same odds. And then they said, "We don't run." Remember that. Remember it when you face your own impossible moments, your own extinction-level challenges, your own temptations to retreat into safety and let others face the darkness. Remember what the humans taught us. The galaxy turned away, but Earth stepped forward. And that made all the difference.